The diner was quiet that night, just the sound of rain on the windows, a mother and her disabled daughter sketching dreams on a piece of paper. Then laughter broke the silence. A group of bullies walked in, and within minutes, they humiliated her in front of everyone, even slapping her across the face. No one dared to stop them. But what nobody knew was that an hour later, the door would swing open, and a roar of engines would bring justice no one saw coming. The diner sat glowing like a warm lantern against the rainy streets of a quiet small town. Neon lights flickered above the windows, buzzing faintly, while drops of rain traced crooked paths down the glass. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh pie lingered in the air, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where regulars tucked themselves into booths and waitresses carried trays with easy smiles. In the corner near the window sat a young girl. Barely a teenager, her frame looked fragile, her wheelchair tucked carefully beside the booth. Her hands moved delicately across a sketch pad, pencil shading the wings of a bird soaring high above clouds. To anyone watching closely, it wasn't just art, it was escape, a world where she could run, climb, fly, and feel the wind on her face. Across from her, her mother kept a quiet vigil, eyes tired but filled with love, sipping coffee as she watched her daughter lose herself in the dream she was drawing. The bell above the door clanged, jolting the room. A group of teenagers stormed in, their voices sharp against the calm. They carried themselves with the arrogance of boys who had never been told no, laughter spilling out like broken glass. Boots stomped, jackets dripped with rain, and instantly the warmth in the diner dimmed. The waitress greeted them politely, but they brushed past her, loud and careless. Their eyes roamed the room until they landed on the girl by the window. One leaned toward the others, smirking, whispering something cruel. The laughter that followed wasn't kind, it was targeted. The girl shifted in her seat, shoulders tightening as if she could shrink herself smaller, vanish into the paper. Her mother's hand found hers, squeezing gently, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The bullies watched her like hunters circling prey. A chuckle here, a sneer there, and slowly their mocking voices grew bolder, their laughter sharper, until the cozy diner no longer felt safe. And yet none of the customers spoke up. They sat in silence, stealing glances, their shame wrapped in fear. What happened next would scar the night forever. But what nobody in that diner could possibly know was that within an hour, the door would swing open again, and justice would come roaring in on the sound of engines. Her name was Emily, 14 years old, with eyes that carried both the softness of childhood and the weight of battles she'd never chosen to fight. A faint brace hugged her leg, gleaming under the diner's neon light, and her wheelchair sat quietly beside her like an unspoken truth she had long since learned to accept. For Emily, the world often felt like a stage she hadn't auditioned for, where whispers followed her, where children stared too long, and where adults looked away too quickly. Yet instead of bitterness, she carried something rare: gentleness. She didn't push back against the world's cruelty. She simply turned inward to her art and let her pencil do the speaking her voice could not. On this evening, her notebook pages were filled with sketches of wings, birds mid-flight, sweeping skies, and winding roads that stretched to horizons unseen. Each line she drew was not just ink on paper, it was her declaration of hope. Her way of telling herself, there's a place for me out there, beyond stairs, beyond pity. Across the table, her mother, Linda, watched with quiet devotion. Linda's face bore lines of exhaustion, but every glance she gave her daughter was filled with pride. She'd fought battles of her own, extra shifts, sleepless nights, countless hospital visits. And still, she carried herself with the grace of a woman determined to give her daughter a life that felt whole. "Do you want another soda, sweetheart?" Linda asked gently, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. Emily shook her head with a small smile. She didn't ask for much. She never did. A waitress stopped by their booth, setting down a slice of cherry pie with a wink. "For the little artist," she said, ruffling Emily's hair. These small gestures mattered. They made Emily feel less like a spectacle, more like any other teenager out for dessert with her mom. But even as kindness bloomed around her, Emily had learned to live with the shadows. The long stares from strangers, the kids at school who whispered when she rolled past in the hallway, the moments where laughter turned sharp and cruel without warning. And though she smiled through most of it, the truth lingered. She was fragile, her bravery stretched thin by the weight of daily judgment. That fragility was what made her strength so striking. Here she was, sitting in a diner on a rainy night, sketching freedom into existence, daring to dream bigger than the limits her body set. And then, like a storm cloud drifting over a clear horizon, the bullies entered. Their laughter filled the diner, jagged and harsh against the soft hum of safety Emily had built in her corner. They didn't see a girl with dreams, they saw a target. The contrast was stark, almost cinematic. Her quiet resilience against their loud, swaggering dominance. Her fragile bravery against their careless cruelty. And though she tried to keep her head down, her pencil moving, something in the air told her. The piece she had sketched for herself on paper was about to be shattered. The bullies sprawled into the diner like they owned the place, laughter sharp and careless, scattering across the tiled floor like shards of glass. Their boots squeaked with wet footprints, their jackets dripping rain, and their voices sliced through the calm hum of silverware and low conversations. Emily stiffened the moment she felt their eyes on her. She tried to sink deeper into her booth, dragging her sketchbook closer to her chest as if the drawings might shield her. But the boys noticed. They always noticed. "Hey, look at this," one of them muttered, elbowing his friend. His smirk widened as his gaze landed on Emily's wheelchair. "Rolling Thunder S in the house." Their laughter erupted, cruel and echoing far louder than it should have. Her mother, Linda, straightened immediately. "That's enough," she said firmly, her voice calm but edged with warning. "Leave her alone." But they didn't leave. They never did. Another boy swaggered over, leaning across the table like he belonged there. "What are you drawing, huh?" he asked mockingly, snatching the sketchbook from Emily's trembling hands before she could react. He flipped it open, his friends crowding around, laughing harder with every page. "Oh look, birds flying away. Guess that's the only way you'll ever move fast on paper." He tossed the book carelessly to the floor, pages bending, graphite smudging against the linoleum. Emily's cheeks burned red, her eyes stinging as she reached for the fallen sketchpad. Her hands shook. She wasn't angry, she was humiliated. Linda stood, blocking their path, her body small but fierce. "Give it back, and you apologize to her right now." The leader of the group leaned in, his grin chilling. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" He shoved her shoulder, making her stumble back into the booth. The diner gasped, but no one moved. Then, with a sudden, heartless snap of motion, he slapped Emily across the face. The sound cracked louder than thunder. Her head whipped to the side, hair falling across her face as tears welled instantly in her eyes. Silence fell. Every fork, every coffee cup, every conversation froze. The only sound was the buzz of the neon sign outside and the faint hum of the jukebox in the corner. But no one stood up. Not the man in the corner booth, not the couple by the window. They all stared into their plates, their guilt pressing them down like weights. Emily's breath hitched. She lifted her hand slowly to her cheek, skin burning where his palm had struck. Her mother collapsed beside her, pulling her into trembling arms, whispering through tears, "It's okay, baby. It's okay, I've got you." But nothing about it was okay. Not the laughter of the boys as they swaggered out of the diner. Not the cowardly silence of the room. Not the way cruelty had walked in, struck innocence, and walked out unchecked. The waitress stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, her face pale. An old man by the jukebox shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "Kids these days," before sinking back into silence. Emily didn't cry loudly, she didn't scream. Instead, a single tear slid down her cheek as she clutched the sketchbook now bent against her chest. She whispered to her mother, voice breaking, "Why didn't anybody stop them?" Linda had no answer. She just held her daughter tighter, rocking her gently, her own tears soaking into Emily's hair. The diner, once a place of warmth, now felt hollow, like all its light had been stolen in an instant. But what no one knew, what not a soul in that room could imagine, was that this night was far from over. An hour later, the door would swing open again, and with it would come a storm that no bully could laugh their way through. The bell above the diner door jingled mockingly as the bullies shoved it open, their laughter spilling into the night. Tires screeched against wet pavement, and then they were gone, vanishing as quickly as they had poisoned the room. Inside, silence lingered like a stain. The air was heavy, thick with everything unsaid. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was as if the walls themselves were ashamed of what they had just witnessed. Emily sat frozen in her mother's arms, the heat of the slap still burning on her cheek. Her small hand clutched her sketchbook tightly to her chest, the bent spine digging into her palm, as if holding it close could keep the world from taking anything else from her. Her voice broke the silence, soft but cutting like glass. "Mom, why does nobody ever stand up?" Linda's heart clenched. She opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. All she could do was pull her daughter closer, rocking gently, tears streaming down her face. The truth was bitter, because fear had stolen everyone's courage. At the counter, the waitress stared down at the coffee pot in her trembling hands. She wanted to say something, to cross the room, to put her arms around the girl. But instead, she set the pot down quietly and turned away, her shame etched in the slump of her shoulders. The man in the corner booth shifted, staring at the door the bullies had exited through. His fork hovered above his plate, untouched. He clenched his jaw but stayed rooted in place, anger and cowardice wrestling inside him. A young couple by the window leaned toward each other, whispering. The woman wiped at her eyes, whispering, "We should have done something." The man lowered his gaze, murmuring, "What if they turned on us?" Their words hung between them, hollow excuses. Cinematic frames filled the room. A half-eaten burger going cold. French fries scattered across a plate, untouched. A glass of soda with ice melting slowly, fizz fading into nothing. Emily's sketchbook lying on the floor, pages crumpled, one drawing of wings smeared by a footprint. And outside, the neon sign flickering erratically, buzzing against the darkness, as though even the light itself struggled to stay alive. The diner, once warm with chatter and comfort, now felt hollow, an empty shell echoing with the weight of what hadn't been done. Emily lifted her head just enough to look around the room. No one met her eyes. Every customer looked away, some hiding in shame, others staring into their food, pretending the world hadn't just broken apart in front of them. The silence was unbearable, the guilt suffocating. Yet still nobody spoke, nobody acted. Linda brushed her daughter's hair back tenderly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." In that moment, the truth was clear. Cruelty had walked in, struck innocence, and left untouched, not because it was stronger, but because everyone else had chosen to stay silent. The night felt heavier now, thick with unspoken shame. But the story wasn't finished, because fate was already rumbling on the horizon, louder than cowardice, stronger than silence. And soon, the sound of engines would change everything. The minutes crawled by in suffocating silence. Rain drummed steadily against the diner windows, washing the neon sign outside into a blur of red and blue streaks. Inside, conversation was hushed, the air thick with unspoken guilt. Most had returned to their meals, though their eyes still carried the weight of what had just unfolded. Emily sat curled against her mother, her cheek pressed against Linda's shoulder, eyes fixed on her bent sketchbook. She had drawn freedom, and the world had stolen it from her. The diner, once her safe space, now felt like a cage. Then 40 minutes later, the bell above the door clanged again. The sound was different this time, heavier, the kind that made everyone look up. The door swung wide, letting in a blast of cold rain and the low growl of engines idling outside. And through it came a wall of leather, boots, and thunder. Bikers. 5 of them, big, broad, draped in black jackets patched with insignias no one dared read too closely. Tattoos curled up their necks and over their hands. Their boots clomped heavily against the tile, echoing through the hushed diner. Every head turned, forks froze midair. The waitress stiffened behind the counter, her hand tightening around a coffee pot. For a moment, it felt like trouble had just walked in. They moved with the confidence of men used to commanding attention, their laughter loud, booming, filling the diner in a way that made plates rattle. One slapped another on the back, nearly shaking the window with his voice. They claimed 2 booths without asking, sliding in like kings returning to their throne. 2 stacks of pancakes, 4 burgers, extra fries, and keep the coffee coming, one called out, tossing a menu aside. His grin was wild, his voice rough as gravel. The waitress nodded quickly, scribbling down the order with shaking hands. Whispers floated through the room. Great, as if tonight wasn't bad enough. Don't make eye contact. They looked dangerous. Linda instinctively pulled Emily closer, her arm wrapping protectively around her daughter's shoulders. Emily shrank back, eyes wide. The sound of their laughter was too much like the Bullies, too loud, too careless. She hugged her sketchbook tighter as though bracing for another storm. From their booth, the bikers filled the diner with a rough energy. They joked, teased each other, smacked the table with their fists as they laughed. One tilted his chair back, boots propped up. Another wiped rainwater from his beard, shaking droplets onto the floor. They were unruly, loud, impossible to ignore. And yet beneath the chaos, there was something different, something subtle. Their glances weren't cruel. Their laughter wasn't directed at anyone but themselves. They filled the air with noise, yes, but not venom. It was a storm, but not a violent one. Emily watched them carefully, her pencil tapping nervously against the cover of her sketchbook. Every instinct told her to hide, to shield herself. But then her gaze caught on something. One of the bikers, the largest of the group, noticed her. For a split second, her chest tightened. She waited for the sneer, the mocking words, the same cruel spark she had seen earlier. Instead, he gave her a nod, small, respectful, a silent acknowledgement. She blinked, uncertain. Linda noticed, too. She didn't relax, but she hesitated, her protective grip loosening ever so slightly. The room was tense, on edge, the customers whispering their judgments and suspicions. To them, trouble had arrived. But the truth, the real story, was something no one in that diner could see yet. Because appearances deceive, and what looked like danger was about to become something else entirely. The rain hadn't let up outside, hammering the diner's glass like a steady drumbeat. Inside, the bikers' voices boomed, gravelly laughter, the clink of mugs, the scrape of boots across linoleum. To most eyes, they were a storm in leather, inked arms, jagged scars, heavy chains swinging against their vests. Customers kept their heads down, whispering, expecting trouble to follow like smoke. The girl sat small in her corner booth, her sketchbook still abandoned on the floor, pages bent, smudged from where it had been trampled. She kept glancing at it, then back at her plate as though afraid to reach for it. Her mother's hand rested protectively on hers, steady but trembling. Then it happened, a pause in the rowdy chorus of laughter. One of the bikers, broad-shouldered with a weather-beaten face, leaned down. His boot nudged the sketchbook. He bent, scooped it up with surprising care, and brushed off the dirt as though it were glass. The diner seemed to hold its breath. He flipped it open, his thick fingers gentle on the fragile paper. The first page revealed a pencil sketch, a girl with broken crutches, staring up at a wide horizon, sunlight spilling through clouds. His hardened features softened instantly. His lips pressed into a line, eyes clouding with something unspoken. Slowly, he walked toward the girl. Chairs creaked, customers shifted nervously, expecting him to sneer or scold. But instead, he crouched at her level, lowering his massive frame until his eyes met hers. "You draw freedom," he said, his voice gravelly yet breaking. "Better than anyone I've ever known." The girl blinked, confused. You like it," she whispered. He nodded, swallowing hard. "My little sister, she used to draw like this. She couldn't walk, born with legs too weak to hold her, but her art, it was her wings. She's gone now." His hand trembled slightly as he closed the sketchbook, holding it with reverence. "Looking at this, it feels like she's sitting right here again." The mother's eyes filled. The girl's lips parted, her face caught between shock and shy gratitude. The biker placed the sketchbook carefully back on the table in front of her, as though returning something sacred. He gave a small, respectful nod before standing. Behind him, the rest of the bikers, once all harsh laughter and booming noise, had gone quiet. They exchanged glances, their rough edges softening. One with a jagged scar across his cheek murmured, "Kid-S got talent." Another pulled out a napkin, sketching clumsily with a diner pen, then handing it over like a tribute. The youngest of them, tattoos snaking down his arm, simply said, "No one's gonna touch her while we're here." The entire diner, moments ago suffocated with silence and shame, shifted. The same customers who had lowered their eyes earlier now stared wide-eyed at the unexpected transformation, wolves who had turned into guardians. The girl hugged her sketchbook to her chest, trembling but smiling for the first time that night. Her mother exhaled, clutching her daughter tighter, as if the world had tilted into a strange but merciful light. The toughest exterior had revealed the softest heart, and in that moment, the entire diner understood. Appearances deceive, but true strength is always wrapped in empathy. The diner had found a fragile calm. Plates of steaming food arrived at the bikers' table, stacks of pancakes, sizzling bacon, mugs of coffee that steamed in the dim neon light. Their booming laughter had softened into a hum, the kind of rough camaraderie that strangely felt safer than the silence that had come before. The girl traced the edges of her sketchbook, holding it close, a smile ghosting across her lips. For the first time that night, her mother's shoulders lowered. Then the bell above the door jingled. Every head turned. The bullies swaggered back in, dripping arrogance, their voices sharp, echoing as if they owned the space. They hadn't learned shame in their absence. If anything, they returned cockier, entitled, smirking as though the diner were their stage. One leaned against the counter, snapping his fingers at the waitress. Another cracked a cruel grin when his eyes found the girl. "Look who's still here," he sneered, stepping forward. "Little Miss Cripple and her bodyguard Mommy." The words knifed through the room. The girl shrank against her mother, her earlier smile vanishing. But this time, something was different. The bullies' grins faltered when they noticed the row of leather jackets. The bikers had risen, chairs scraping against the floor like thunder. Boots hit the ground in heavy rhythm as they formed a silent wall around the girl's booth. The leader, the same biker who had returned the sketchbook, stepped forward. His eyes burned not with fury, but with something far more dangerous, quiet conviction. He planted himself in front of the bullies, his shadow swallowing theirs. "You don't hit girls," he said, voice steady as steel, carrying through the diner like a verdict. "Ever." He leaned closer, jaw clenched. "And you sure don't touch someone braver than you'll ever be." The room froze. Every patron, the waitresses, the cook behind the counter, the customers who had earlier lowered their eyes now watched, breathless. One of the bullies tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "We were just kidding around." The biker didn't move. Behind him, his crew fanned out, each one silent, arms folded, tattoos glinting under the neon. The weight of their presence pressed down like a storm. The lead bully swallowed, bravado slipping. "We don't want trouble." "Too late for that," another biker muttered. The leader didn't raise his voice, didn't throw a punch. He simply stared until the bullies withered under the weight of their own cowardice. Then he jerked his chin toward the door. "Out, now." Humiliated, faces burning, the bullies stumbled backward. The bikers escorted them step by step, not with fists but with silence, the kind that cuts deeper than any blow. The glass door swung open, the night swallowing their retreat. Rain slapped their backs as they vanished into the dark, no laughter left in their throats. The diner exhaled as one. The bikers returned to their seats, calm as if nothing had happened. The leader gave the girl a small nod, a simple acknowledgement of strength shared. She clutched her sketchbook tighter, eyes wide not with fear anymore, but with awe. Around the room, the customers' shame shifted into something else: respect, gratitude, even courage. The silence that had once betrayed her now felt like reverence. Justice had not come from the powerful in suits, nor from the bystanders who looked away. It had come on the backs of men the world judged too quickly, men who carried their scars like armor and knew that real strength was defending those who couldn't fight back. And in that diner on that rain-soaked night, justice arrived not with violence, but with guardians who wore leather and carried broken hearts stitched together with loyalty. The storm had passed, though rain still drummed softly on the windows outside. Inside, the diner felt transformed. The thick, suffocating silence that had once hung in the air had given way to warmth, as though the very walls had exhaled relief. The bikers returned to their booth, their laughter rolling back in like distant thunder, not menacing this time, but grounding, human, even comforting. The leader caught the girl's eye and offered a wink. "Now let's see some of those sketches," he said, nodding toward the notebook she held protectively against her chest. At first she hesitated. Then slowly she opened it. The pages bloomed with drawings, birds with wings stretched wide, winding highways leading toward sunsets and wide-open skies filled with color and hope. One biker leaned over, squinting. "You did all that?" His voice cracked with genuine admiration. "Kid, you've got more talent than I've seen in any gallery." Another chuckled. "Autograph it. Someday when you're famous, I'll say I had a sketch signed before anyone else." He slid a napkin across the table with a pen, grinning. The girl blushed, glancing at her mother, who nodded through teary eyes. Her trembling hand steadied as she signed her name for the very first time, not as someone overlooked, but as someone seen. Around the diner, other customers began to stir. The waitress approached, biting her lip. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the mother, "for not stepping in earlier." Her voice shook with shame. "It wasn't right." The mother's eyes softened. "It's never too late to do better," she replied quietly. Soon, more patrons echoed the sentiment, a man at the counter tipping his cap, a young couple murmuring thanks to the bikers. Apologies overlapped, but so did gratitude. The air buzzed not with guilt anymore, but with a desire to mend what had been broken. The girl looked up, her voice barely audible but stronger than ever before. Someone stood up this time. The bikers exchanged glances, their tough exteriors hiding the ripple of emotion that sentence stirred in them. The leader leaned down, resting a heavy, calloused hand on her sketchbook. "And don't you forget, kid, you deserve people standing up for you. Always." For the first time that night, her mother's tears carried hope instead of fear. She squeezed her daughter's shoulder, smiling through the blur. The diner, once heavy with cowardice, now pulsed with something far greater. Courage rediscovered, humanity revived. Neon lights flickered not in gloom, but in quiet celebration, as though the night itself had shifted course. In that booth, surrounded by unlikely guardians and humbled strangers, a girl who had known too much cruelty discovered what it felt like to be protected, cherished, and believed in. And though her drawings captured freedom with pencil and paper, it was this moment, laughter filling the air, strangers becoming family, that gave her the truest wings she had ever drawn. The diner had returned to life, voices soft but steady, laughter cautiously weaving itself back into the night. Plates were cleared, coffee poured, and for a moment it felt almost like any other evening, except for the quiet glow that now lingered around one booth in particular. The bikers were getting ready to leave. One by one, they pushed back their chairs, heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. The leader stood last, adjusting the worn leather of his vest, its patches stitched with years of battles, rides, and brotherhood. He paused beside the girl's table. She looked up, her sketchbook still open on her lap, pencil hovering mid-line as though afraid the moment would vanish if she blinked. Slowly, he reached to his vest. Fingers tugged at a patch, an emblem weathered but proud, the insignia of their brotherhood. With careful precision, he pulled it free. The diner went quiet again, not with fear this time, but with reverence, as though every soul there knew something sacred was happening. He crouched beside her wheelchair, placing the patch gently in her hand. "This isn't just cloth," he said, his voice low, steady as the road. "It means loyalty, family, strength, and now it means you ride with us wherever we go." Her breath caught. For the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in far too long, she smiled, wide and unguarded. The patch lay heavy in her palm, but to her it felt like a medal, a shield against every cruel word ever thrown her way. Her mother covered her mouth with trembling fingers, eyes flooding again, not with sorrow but with awe. The leader gave the girl's hand a squeeze, then rose. Without ceremony, without needing thanks, he turned and joined his crew. Together, they strode out into the rain-soaked night. The engines ignited, roaring like thunder across the small-town streets. Neon lights flickered across the window as the motorcycles pulled away, their tail lights glowing red against the wet pavement until they disappeared into the horizon. Inside, the diner seemed brighter, warmer, alive again. The girl clutched the patch to her chest as though she had just been knighted. For once, she didn't feel small or fragile. She felt seen. And in the echo of roaring engines, the entire room understood. Some gifts weigh nothing, yet carry the power to change everything. Cruelty often doesn't need an army. Sometimes it only takes a few voices of mockery to wound someone deeply. But what allows cruelty to thrive is silence. The silence of those who look away. The silence of those who hope someone else will act. That night in the diner, we saw two kinds of strength. The false strength of bullies, loud, shallow, built on the weakness of others. And the true strength of strangers, quiet, steady, carrying scars of their own, but choosing to protect instead of harm. Real strength is never about fists or fear or dominance. It's about standing up for someone who cannot. It's about lending your courage when theirs has been shaken. It's about stepping forward even when everyone else stays seated. And appearances, they can deceive us all. Leather jackets, tattoos, roaring engines, the world saw trouble. But beneath that rough exterior was compassion, loyalty, and honor. Sometimes the most unexpected faces carry the greatest kindness. So here's the challenge for all of us. Be the biker in someone's story. Stand up when others stay silent. Be the shield, the voice, the strength that someone needs in their darkest hour. Because in the end, it wasn't fists that changed that night. It was compassion. Thank you for watching this story of courage, kindness, and unexpected heroes. Moments like these remind us that true strength lies not in intimidation, but in compassion, in standing up for those who can't stand alone. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may feel its power too. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire hope, courage, and humanity. And remember, you never know when you might be the biker in someone's story. Until next time, keep kindness alive, because courage is contagious.